Welcome to the arrivals at the end of leg 3 of the Ocean Race Europe and the first of the IMOCA 60s to reach the finish line. And it won't be any surprise to anybody that's been following the race. Offshore Team Germany has really been the dominating force strategically, sailing up the coastline to the west, to the north of the fleet. And now they are coming in a very strong position indeed. Joining me as ever is Abby Ehler. And Abby, first of all, the conditions, yes, very different at the moment for these boats coming in. But before we kind of dive into that, and we're going to be able to bring you some live images from on board the boat shortly, what an incredible performance from this team. I mean, they're not just winning by a bit, they're winning by room to spare.
Yeah, indeed. I think, as I mentioned before, that the fact that they've chosen that northerly route around the Balearics, it suited their boat. It was slightly more upwind course. The fact that they don't have foils, it kind of restricts their off the breeze performance. But for upwind in light air, this really has been a leg that suited them to a T, and the result is going to replicate that. And it's a very well-deserved win for Offshore Team Germany. And yeah, as you said, we've seen all the conditions this morning. We've had upwind, downwind, a drift off, and here they are bringing in breeze to the finish line. So that's good news.
Very good news, and very good news, as you say, for this boat. There's a little bit of slop out there, but I'm assuming that's just a little bit of wake from some of the large ships that have been kind of coming and going from this area. It has got a little bit lighter for this boat, as we've seen for all the boats, for the entire 7-boat fleet of the VO65s that have finished a few hours ago. Now it's the turn of Offshore Team Germany to sail through that light wind patch, waiting just by the finish line. But breeze enough to make them feel like their progress is not going to be thwarted. And crucially as well, a very easy angle here into the line. I mean, they're laying that on a reach.
Yeah, so quite different from the conditions we'd seen earlier this morning, where we were seeing the breeze perhaps more out of the northeast. This appears to have gone right, shifted perhaps more down to the west and down to the south than what we were seeing earlier. So yeah, a great angle to be cruising into the finish line, and they all seem pretty relaxed, and they'll be really happy with this result.
And we've had some word from the boat that, I mean, just in case this story needs anything else to make it a bit more remarkable, since last night, they've basically been sailing blind. They haven't had any instruments. They had a bit of a problem with this on earlier legs, sorted it, then the problem seems to have come back. And so these last 16 hours or so, where it has been so tricky to feel the breeze and to get the boat on the right angle, and that instrumentation would be so important, they've been doing all of this just by feel, just relying on those skills that you have as a young dinghy sailor coming up through Optimists.
Yeah, well, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, they had experience of this on the leg before. Obviously, the conditions were very different on the previous leg, a lot more higher breeze range, which meant, you know, hand steering these boats. They're completely not designed to be hand steered. There's nowhere comfortable to sit. The visibility is quite impaired. And to add to the fact you have the hydraulic rams of the autopilot, which are permanently fixed to the tiller, it means you have very little feel in the helm compared to a conventional, or compared to the other class that's competing in the VO65s. So a very hard boat to steer, but at least it's been a lighter leg and would have been a little easier to get where they are and to hold on to their position. But yeah, sailing blind without instruments is definitely going to be taking its toll.
But as you say, it's relying on skills that this team do have in abundance. And you know, I should probably put my hand up and apologise to this team in particular, because I think with the IMOCA 60s, the story has been so much about the boats themselves and the design and the setup. And when you were looking at this team on paper compared to the latest generation IMOCA 60s, you wouldn't have thought that this was the distance that we would see between Offshore Team Germany and, I mean, there it is, linked out, 11th hour racing, I mean, behind them, Buer Valet and then Corum, some way back. I mean, that's an enormous lead. You would have thought that it would be the other way around, with the more modern boats being able to find their stride and push ahead. And I think that really in my mind, what this comes down to is the sailors on board. Maybe we've concentrated a little bit too much on the design of the boat, but there are some incredibly good sailors on board offshore Team Germany who have obviously gelled well and found a good gear.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. With this team, they've definitely got a mix of skill sets in, you know, Benjamin, who's a Vendée Globe competitor, so he brings that offshore trait to the team. And between Annie Lush and Philippe, they've got exceptional dinghy experience. They've both competed in the Olympics. And having that sort of finite attention to detail, that real performance want, you know what I mean? You're always wanting to get the last ounce out of the boat. That's something that Annie does exceptionally well, and having sailed with her myself twice around the world, I know she's always looking for that extra bit of performance. So yeah, I think they've really, as you said, they've gelled together. They've got a good range of skill sets, and the boat's been suited completely to this leg, so a nice wrap.
The picture's just perfectly backing up what you were saying, where we can just see Annie Lush a moment ago in the red cap, just to leeward, still trimming that head sail, making sure that the boat is still pulling well and still pushing in. And as the helicopter pans up, you can see the light winds out on the right, so they are still lurking there. But this team, this boat right now is, well, it's tracking straight to the finish line. It will be a slightly different finish line to what we saw with the VO65s in the hours previously. It's just slightly to the right, but not so far as to really move it into a new bit of water and a new sort of tactical playground. But just interesting that even though we've had the breeze come right the way around to the right, seems to have stabilized a little bit, or at least their speed's been relatively consistent. You've still got to be a bit careful. You've still got to be looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, we can see here from the helicopter shot that it is patchy, very streaky as the breeze is coming down, but it's looking hopeful that there's enough there to get them across that finish line. As it looks like there's almost a shutdown line about 200 meters off the land, so you don't want to get too far into that. But yeah, I mean, that's a great shot there of just how patchy it is, and yeah, not far to go.
Not far to go, but you are right. I was being a little bit too optimistic, as I just checked their latest speed, 4 knots, and that's down from 8 when we came on air. But 4.7, I should just say. The tracker's rounding, but my number is accurate. However, the distance between them and the finish line is, I mean, minuscule compared to the distance behind them. So let's take a look at where the other IMOCA 60s are lying at the moment. And I think the big thing to point out straight away, Abby, is Linked Out are now ahead of 11th Hour Racing. And then we've got Bureau then Coram. And Linked Out have struggled on this leg. We know that Clarice wasn't feeling very well on the first day. She was feeling a little bit sick, and that's just, I mean, I can't imagine anything worse than baking on a boat in 30 degrees of sun with no shade and, you know, feeling pretty under the weather. However, once again, in these final stages, they've been able to get round the others, and that's the key moment. If you see the tracks where they come out here, that key moment and timing that turn back in, just getting the right angle, just getting the right breeze, it's played out beautifully for Linked Out.
Yeah, I think I recall back to the start of this leg, and they remember calling that they didn't have a timely start, and it felt like they were a little bit on the back foot off that get-go. But they've obviously, as you said, they've played a really nice race, and as we've said in the previous fleet, I mean, it's all come down to this final few hours and the final 10 miles to the finish line, where we've just seen a complete mix-up of the fleet before. So effectively, you know, there's just so much at stake in these final miles.
And the battles that we thought were going to be featuring in those final few miles of, well, some of them have been played out. I wouldn't rule out something between Linked Out and 11th Hour Racing. I think they're close enough to see a compression and then potentially a little bit of a change between those two. Bureau need to do something, and Coram need to do even more to try and reverse their fortunes in the final stages of this leg. But not so much for offshore Team Germany, who are coming into the finish at the moment. So 4.5 knots at the moment, and this is the shot coming out from the shoreline towards offshore Team Germany in your top left-hand side of picture. And in front of them, you can just about see the finish line. I mean, Abby, I think if you were on board offshore Team Germany, or indeed if you were fans of the boat, and you wanted to see their hard work rewarded, the finish line is there just in front of them, but that breeze has got an awful lot of holes in it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful it's looking at far more stable than some of the points we've seen it earlier this morning, and really hoping that this is just the start of the sea breeze that will just continue to build as the land warms up during the day, and hopefully the boats behind will come in with a little more pressure than what we're seeing now. But there's definitely breeze there. It's a little bit of a hole that they're about to sail into and about 50 meters ahead there, but yeah, hopeful that they can carry their speed across the finish line, which is just in view there.
I mean, the interesting thing, I think, is difficult to tell from the heli, but it almost looks like there is quite a bit of slop on the water, you know, a fair bit of wake. I mean, you can see how many boats there are at anchor in the bay, and presumably there's a reasonable amount of traffic. We've certainly seen a good few ships come and go. That is the chase boat with our camera crew on board on the white motorboat just to the left of offshore Team Germany. And then I think there's that rib next to them. Might be a team rib, might be just spectators out on the water, but they're going to be keeping their weight down. But there's just enough just to see that mast rocking backwards and forwards, and when it gets light, trimming your sails on a reach as the rig is kind of swinging around. It's really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's one thing you don't want in light air is any waves or any wash, but I guess the Med is fairly renowned for having this kind of swell. It's, I guess, a bit of a mystery where it comes from. Like you said, maybe it is just a bit of leftover from the shipping that we've seen earlier this morning. I think it's just one of those Med traits, but at least it's a nice gentle swell, and you can see they're just sort of riding each wave, and luckily the breeze is on the beam, so it's probably the best angle they could be at now for speed-wise to get them across this finish line.
Well, they're going to need all of it. That main is, well, it's looking a little bit better now, but just as we cut to that helicopter shot, it was certainly looking quite light and sort of flapping around, inverting itself. They're all certainly looking quite relaxed, and I think for very good reason. The hard work is done. We haven't seen in the VO65 the same thing as we're seeing now. I mean, this boat took the lead relatively early on with what appeared to be a very clear strategy to follow. We're going to go towards the coast, we're going to sail in this direction. They let all the other IMOCAs go. Everybody else from the Tabarca leaving mark all the way back in Alicante sailed east. They sailed north, and while for the VO65s, the boats that did the same and got the early lead eventually lost it, for this team it's just remained solid enough. It was an 80-mile lead at one point, and we've seen that lead diminish a little bit, certainly as we were coming into last night. But at the moment, with their nearest rival 25 nautical miles behind them, they can be pretty confident that, I mean, they could pretty much paddle across the line at this point and they would make it. I mean, this is hard work rewarded. And Abby, you were saying that you know Annie well. Be honest, how confident were this team of this performance against those other IMOCA 60s and the sailors? I mean, did they think that this would happen?
Yeah, it's a really hard question to answer. I mean, they must have had a fair amount of confidence going into the leg, just knowing the weather forecast, the routing, the fact that it was predominantly a light air leg, a lot of VMG sailing, which will suit them down to the ground, because they're not a foiling boat, they've got a slightly narrower hull shape. So I think that really has just played out in their favour. And as we said earlier about the crew on board, they've got two very good dinghy sailors in Annie and Philip, and also in Robert the skipper. They would never have given up. They would have just been pushing, looking for that performance all the time. So I think it's great to see them hold on to this lead, unlike the story that we saw play out with Sailing Poland, who had led so far in the leg and then had victory snatched from them. So I'm really happy that these guys are going to hold on to this lead.
Well, there is the finish line. That's how long they need to hold on for it to claim those maximum 5 points in the IMOCA 60 class. I mean, they're certainly going to do it. They know they are, which is why you can already see them celebrating and recording it in pictures. We've got a media crew member on board. One of the sailing team has to also, well, earn their keep, so to speak, but there to bring us the reactions from on board. And there they go, Offshore Team Germany across the line. A fantastic, absolutely unmistakable statement about what this team can do. It's an old boat. It was certainly in a lot of people's eyes not a boat that was going to feature that strongly on the water, but maybe the conditions, but certainly the skill of these sailors have seen it sail so far into the lead on this final leg, and they are going to go into the coastal race feeling very confident about what they can do. And Abby, I mean, I think let's just take it there for a second. So we do have this final coastal race on Saturday with 3 points on offer for the winner, and then 2 points and then 1 point for the remaining podium places. Nothing if you come 4th and 5th. But with 5 boats in the IMOCA 60, I mean, that's quite a lot of the fleet that can get points and sort of affect the scoreboard. And while you finish a race like this so far ahead of your nearest rivals, it still only equates to 1 more point than them on the scoreboard.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not a time to let your guard down, and going into this coastal, it's still all to play for.
Yeah, these are the points that people are going to be focusing on, and obviously only Offshore Team Germany at this point do we know. They're going to be on 14 points. The rest of the positions and the rest of the scores are basically taken on where the fleet are ranked at the moment, who's closest to the finish line, and we can be reasonably confident that that's going to play out. We might see 11th Hour Racing Team and Linked Out change places on the water, in which case the 13 points would go to 11th Hour Racing Team, the 12 to Linked Out. But for the moment, the key thing is if everybody finishes where they are, Coram, Bureau Valet, well, both of those teams will not have a shot at the podium, even with a strong performance in the coastal, whereas Offshore Team Germany, Linked Out and 11th Hour Racing Team, all of them will need to perform strongly, because if any one of them wins, we could still see somebody else taking that top spot away from Offshore Team Germany. So Offshore Team Germany crossed the finish line. A fantastic lead turned into maximum points for Robert Stanjek and crew. Behind them, we've got a ways to go before we're going to see the other IMOCA 60s coming across the finish line. There will be a big battle for the remaining points. We're going to take a break before we bring you all that action.